Welcome to the Sustainable Soul Podcast with me, Christine Martin. I am a group fitness instructor and gym manager who has also struggled with eating disorders and finding joyful, meaningful movement that fits into your life rather than takes away from it. I'm here to talk about all things holistic health and wellness, how to joyfully move our bodies in a place that comes from love rather than hate, and to just create a safe space for this community. I hope you enjoy the show. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Sustainable Soul Podcast. Happy June. It is crazy to me that June is here. Month 6 of the year. That's wild. It's crazy. Yeah, time is going by so fast this year. I feel like it is crazy right now that it is June. But new month, new intentions, new fun things going on. Summer is almost here. Feels like it's here in the Bay Area. It's foggy in the mornings. It's foggy at night, but it's so beautiful and sunny during the day. I love it. Summer is here in my book. Alert the presses. Summer is here. And I just thought that this beginning of the month would be a good time for me to come back to my little series on our cycles, our periods, our menstrual cycles. And it's honestly perfect timing because it's a new month. I just started my period, and it's time to talk about our menstrual phase of our cycle. So today we're going to be talking all about our periods, all about menstrual cycle, some hormonal changes that happen, the ways that it can possibly affect us. I'm going to go through that book that I talked about in my luteal phase episode. It's called Period Power by Maisie Hill. I'll have it linked in the notes and everything. But I'm going to go through that book, what I've learned from the chapter on the menstrual phase, as well as a couple podcasts. I'm going to talk about let's see what my outline says. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about advocating for your cycle health and how to kind of speak to doctors about your menstrual cycle, reclaiming rest when you're on your period, reclaiming what that means for you. And then we're going to set some intentions for the month ahead. All right? I'm so excited. Let's get into it. Before we get started, let's go through my rosebud thorn and life update. So life update, I went home this last weekend, which was really nice to just be with my family. It was the long weekend. Didn't have work on Monday, so I got to spend like a full 2 days there. And it was great, except for the fact that the traffic getting there was so bad. It was horrible. But whatever, we got over it. There was that. And then also I was in my luteal phase, so I was kind of feeling a little monstrous, which I'm trying to give myself some grace for. That's part of the reason why I'm doing this episode, is because I've just been like really hard on myself for how I was in my luteal phase. Like I just get snappy and grumpy. We talked about it in that other episode. And I know there are hormone changes going on inside me. I know that maybe I wasn't taking enough time for myself. I wasn't taking enough time to kind of take deep breaths, relax, all of those good things. But at the same time, it's never fun when you feel like you're not being super nice. So I'm trying to give myself grace, but I'm also trying to think about how next month maybe I can just set some intentions around that time, especially in how I'm acting with others. But it's all okay. We're going to get through it. I'm drinking some warm lemon water here. And if you can't see it, it's because maybe you should go to the YouTube. Yes, that is right. I am filming my episodes now. I put the first one from last week up on my YouTube channel. I'll have it linked. It's like my old YouTube that I've been using forever. I changed the @ to Sustainable Soul Pod, so hopefully you could just search it that way, but I'll also link it below. So if you want to go watch this on camera, it's there. Hi, everyone who's watching on there. And yeah, I think those are pretty much the big life updates. Nothing too crazy going on. Same old at work. And I'm really excited to get into this episode. Let's go through the rosebud thorns of the week. So, my rose was spending time with my mom this weekend. It was so nice to just relax, and on Sunday I had a bunch of extended family over, so I got to see her, but it wasn't as much like quality time. It was more like family time. We were all together. But then on Monday, Stephen and I made lunch with her. We like all had brunch together, and we just sat on the couch and talked for a while and got coffee, and that was just really nice to really have that downtime with my mom. It is so special, and I appreciate it so much. And my bud for the week is that I'm working really hard on. Oh, not working really hard. I finished wellness coaching yesterday. So I did a 3-month program, just finished it up yesterday, and now my bud is that I'm kind of on my own. I'm out of the nest, and it's time for me to keep working on myself. So something that I'm doing is every week I'm setting up like the same 45 minutes that I would take for wellness coaching, but I'm just doing personal wellness coaching. So it's going to be just me goal setting and talking to myself and checking in about the week. So I'm really excited to start doing that and see how that works when it's just me and not in wellness coaching. And then my thorn of the week was probably just the traffic getting home. It really killed my vibe. I wish it didn't, but oh my gosh, it was so long. But in the grand scheme of things, that thorn, it ain't so bad. So let's get into the episode. All right. So to start out, I'm going to talk about the little research background stuff that I did. So mostly just talking through that book and the podcast about what I learned about this phase in your cycle. So this is from a podcast called Fertility Co. I also went through their luteal phase episode in the luteal phase episode that I did. So I'll link them down below. This is their menstrual cycle masterclass episode 1. And this is just kind of an overview an overview of what happens when you are menstruating. So we'll start with that, and then we're going to go into a podcast I listened to about what's a normal period, quote, normal period. And then I'm going to talk about how I got a little bit scared by these podcasts, and yeah, we'll go into that. And then I'll talk about the book, because that's more like spiritual, mental tools for this. So this first Fertility Co. podcast is a little background. So your period is normally 2 to 7 days long. 2 would be very light and short. 7 is kind of on the long end. And this is counting like rich bleeding, not spotting. So the days that you have like a normal flow, whatever that means for you, it's about 2 to 7 days long. And when you menstruate, it's because you don't have a fertilized egg, or you're not pregnant. So it means in the last month your eggs didn't get fertilized by a sperm and you are not pregnant. So yeah, that can bring up a lot of emotions, good or bad. I'm sure if you're trying to get pregnant, it can be really hard to like get your period and be like, oh my gosh, another month, I'm not pregnant. But if you're not trying to get pregnant, it's kind of like a release, and it's like, deep breath. let's get on to the next month. Let's get this cycle started again. So I think there can be a lot of emotions, good or bad, and it's important to meet yourself where you're at with that. And when you start your period, your cervix is open, and your endometrian lining. I didn't spell the word right when I took notes, but your lining sheds, and with it comes blood and mucus. Let me look at what that word is. What lining sheds on your period? Oh, endometrium. That's what it is. Endometrium. It's the lining of your uterus is what's shedding, because it doesn't need to have a baby. So that's what's happening. And okay, this is saying that you lose 2 to 4 tablespoons of blood, which I remember learning that in school too. I must just have a heavy flow, because I'm like, I feel like I bleed more than that. But says 2 to 4 tablespoons of blood, give or take, is what you usually lose. And as the menstrual, and if you lose less than 2 tablespoons, it's considered a light period. And if you lose more, it's considered heavy. And as your menstrual flow reduces, your cervix starts to close and a mucus plug comes in, which is kind of crazy. But that's why more mucus isn't like coming out after, because there's a plug. Yeah, and like your hormones just dictate all of this. They make it kind of dry up. They make the mucus plug come in. They dictate everything that's going on down there during the phases of your cycle. And it's important to remember that hormones, maintain and regulate all of the body systems. Hormones are responsible for a lot of things that are going on in our body, but they can also all affect each other. So if you are low in something, that affects another thing. Like it's like I talked about in the luteal phase. I'm not going to get too in the weeds because I'm not too familiar with it, and that's not the point of my podcast. But definitely listen to more like scientific or doctor medical podcasts if you want to know more about what hormones are influencing each other. But for me, it's important for me to remember that just like there are so many things at play in my body, and all of these hormones are affecting each other. So when we start our period, our estrogen levels are low and they rise to our peak before ovulation and when you're fertile. And your progesterone levels are also low, and they stay low until after ovulation because they support pregnancy. So you don't really need progesterone until your body thinks you're going to be pregnant. And so progesterone is not the cause of PMS symptoms. I talked about this a lot in the luteal phase episode, but your progesterone does rise, but that's not causing your symptoms. But the imbalance of hormones is what usually causes symptoms and inflammation and all of that irregular stuff. And menstruation can be difficult for many, like I talked about. You have mood swings. Sometimes you just feel down, feel shitty. It can be even more emotional if you're trying to get pregnant. It can just be an emotional time. And we'll talk more about how that can kind of be a hard sentence to say, and that we don't want to stereotype that if you're on your period, you're going to be emotional. But it is important to check in. And if you're feeling a little extra emotional, maybe it's because of the hormones at play. It's also just challenging because the symptoms that some of us get, like cramps, fatigue, low energy, different food cravings, being moody, social withdrawal, and reduced performance in like working out. I know that that's hard for me when I'm trying to work out when I'm in my menstrual phase. It's just like, oh my gosh, why can't I do anything? It feels impossible to do what's normally easy for me. So I think just all of that can kind of cause a discomfort within, but it's also sort of a sign to pull back. And yeah, in this podcast, she talks about just our innate feminine wisdom and tapping into our intuition. I'm going to talk more about that when I go through the book, but this is a time where you really draw inward, and it's when intuition is really high. It's when the kind of swings of the luteal phase are starting to settle out, and you can really just draw inward and listen to your intuition. And she suggests that for workouts, to reduce the intensity of the workouts, to adjust your workouts based on how you might be feeling, maybe to sub out your high impact workouts with a low impact workout, like instead of running or doing a hard spin workout, taking a walk outside. And again, this is hard. Like as a fitness instructor, like I'm teaching a class tonight and I'm on the heaviest day of my period. I can't just be like, oh, sorry, like let's all get outside and run. Like you have to kind of lead the classes. But for me, I try to work within the boundaries of what I have. So I'm going to teach the spin class, but my resistance is going to be much lower than it normally is. I'm going to be off the bike, walking around, helping people more. Like work within what you have and assess your energy levels and play off of that. You don't have to stop everything you're doing, and you probably can't stop everything you're doing just because you're feeling a little bit down or you're feeling off because of your period. But it is a good time to try to take note and adjust as much as you can. Also, she talks a lot about rest and recovery and working out. Like cutting back a day or two is really beneficial for you in the long run, because if you're fatigued and you push through it and you try to do these high intensity workouts, you have a much higher chance of getting injured. So just remember that a couple days is really not so big in the grand scheme. You're not going to lose your gains. You're not going to, if you're a runner, you're not going to forget how to run. You're not going to lose all of your endurance. You'll be okay if you take off a day or two. And this is good for any time, but especially when you're in your menstrual phase, it's a good time to take a step back and to relax a little bit. And working too hard can actually add stress, which makes our periods worse. So increasing our cortisol levels by working out a little bit too hard can actually worsen our periods. And then she talks about sleep. So the hormone changes within us can make us actually sleep warmer when we're on our periods, and also cramps can keep you up. So she was saying it's important to make sure you sleep in a cool room. Try to go to bed a little bit earlier because you might get woken up by these symptoms, and just really focus on winding down, whether that's using essential oils or a heating pad or reading before bed or doing a face mask or gua sha. I don't know, whatever you do to wind yourself down, just focus on that so that you get really quality rest during this time so we can be energized for the next parts of our phase. And with nutrition, so this is where I get stressed in podcasts. Okay, so we'll go through it. She basically talks about when you're bleeding heavy, you crave more iron. So you can eat steak if you eat red meat, or spinach, or lots of greens and veggies like spinach, kale. I think strawberries have a lot of iron. There's different natural sources you can just get iron from, or taking an iron supplement is helpful in increasing your iron, but it might kind of hide the root cause. Like if you're iron deficient, it might be better to try to get it naturally, but if you want to take supplements too. It's also good to get more antioxidants, boosting your energy and just your overall well-being. It reduces inflammation if you have antioxidants. And so here's the part where it can get tricky for me. And if you struggle with food and your body and you feel like it's triggering to hear about how other people eat, please skip ahead a couple minutes. Like, I know that this can be hard for some people. So basically she was talking about, so I've always thought that on your period you use more energy, which I kind of think is true. I don't know for sure, but this podcast is saying something different. She was saying that you actually have lower energy requirements, but I think she was talking about if you're really slowing down and taking back. So she was saying that, like, oh, you might be less hungry. And I kind of feel like she was saying it in like a celebratory way, which I have an issue with, because being less hungry isn't something to celebrate. And when I hear things like this, like, oh, you're actually burning more calories or you're burning less calories, I really internalize that, and it takes away from my intuition with eating. So I think this is kind of counterproductive to like our innate feminine wisdom and our intuition during this time. If you feel like you're less hungry, obviously eat what's going to make you feel good. But if you're feeling more hungry, don't let something like this that says, oh, you actually have less energy requirements. No one knows what your body specifically is doing. So eat what makes you feel good. Don't have some preconceived notion about, oh, I'm burning this many calories or this many calories. You really can't tell. I'm sure there are big studies that show different things, and I'm sure if you looked for either of these answers, you could find it. But it's just important to remember that everybody's body is different. So your energy requirements are going to be different than mine. It's going to be different than everyone else's. So listen to your body, tune into that wisdom, and eat what's going to make you feel good. But it is important to think about healthy fats, proteins, antioxidants, all these great things that you can add to your diet. But don't fight if you have cravings. I think it's better if you're craving sugar to have a little bit of sugar than to think about it and be stressed and guilty, because that's going to raise your cortisol levels, right? We don't want to raise our stress. So do what's going to be the least stressful, most stressful for you path during this time. And I also got stressed listening to these podcasts. I listened to another one about like what is a normal cycle, and I'll link it below. I think it's important if you feel like something is irregular to understand what a normal cycle is. It's a good indicator of your health. And if you've lost your period, that can be an indicator of something different, especially if you struggle with food in your body. Like, I lost my period when I was peak eating disorder because I wasn't eating enough and I was working out too much. So my body started to shut down my menstrual phase, because if you're not supporting yourself, you can't support a child. So your body stops that fertility because it's like you can't support another human being right now. You're not fit to be a parent. So that can be a good indicator that something is wrong. If your period is irregular, like all these things. But at the same time, listening to these things about what is normal makes me so stressed about like, oh my gosh, maybe something isn't normal. And she talked about different causes of things. And then I started getting hard on myself about my own habits. There's things like that where sometimes for me, it's too much information. And I want you to remember that if it's becoming too much information, take a step back and remember that you know yourself better than anybody else does. All right. So let's get into the book. My favorite book about periods is Period Power by Maisie Hill. So this is more of the mental, emotional side of your period and kind of how she feels that you could best support yourself during this time. So she says that it is a time to slow down, to take a step back, and to tune in to the big decisions that you might need to make after your luteal phase, when you're kind of feeling a little more irritable, a little bit more like your thoughts are firing, but they're not necessarily all positive or conducive to making big decisions. Now is the time to really pull back and think about those big decisions. And she explains it like it feels like a bubble has popped after you're done PMSing. If you have bad PMS symptoms, it's like your symptoms start to go down. You feel more valid for feeling emotional, which I think you should always feel valid for feeling your emotions. But for me, I feel like the second I start bleeding, I'm like, okay, this is why this has been happening. I am on my period. Like, this is the phase of the cycle which is good that it's becoming a little bit more normalized to feel a little bit off. But hopefully in the future, our luteal phase will be also something that people understand is a little bit challenging. So anyway, it feels like a bubble has popped. It feels like you're like, okay, something's happening. I'm going into the next phase and it's time to get it started. She thinks of it as a physical and emotional clear out. So obviously you're shedding blood, you're shedding the lining of your uterus, you're shedding all of these things physically, but mentally, maybe it's a time to shed what no longer serves you. And it can make you feel a little bit out of it if you're lacking sleep, if you're in pain, if you're taking medication. All of these things can just make you feel a little groggy and out of it. So that's totally normal if you feel that. And if you have menstrual pain, it can make you draw even more inward. So it's a time that maybe you're not wanting to be as social and you're not wanting to see people as much. And conversations might kind of start to drain you because you have this so much inward power and emotion. And if you have really bad pain, something I like to think of is just drawing inward, and it's way easier said than done. Like, talk to me when I'm having a bad cramp and I might say something a little bit different, but it's a good time to just draw into yourself and breathe into your pain and feel your body. If you're watching, I'm giving myself a little hug. It's important to just remember that your body is working for you and to treat it nicely. And you may feel like you have less boundaries and you feel more sensitive to the world. You might feel more sensitive. And you can also feel more libido because there's more blood flow to the area. Sometimes, I mean, I could see it, but also, like, I just feel gross on my period. Like, okay, which honestly, I shouldn't even say that because I think that has been just instilled in me that, like, your period is gross and your period is not gross. When I say I feel gross, I feel like I'm bloated, I'm not feeling like myself, I'm a little groggy, I'm also bleeding. Like, it is something to, like, clean up, and I think it's not gross, but it's just an extra thing that I'm not used to. So I personally don't usually have an increased libido, especially the first couple of days, but if you do, maybe it's because there's a little more blood flow to the area. So that could be fun. And it's a time to stop, take note how your body feels, to set an intention, and to let go of something. So I'm going to do that at the end of the episode. It's an important time to focus on your needs and what will support you in the upcoming cycle. If we remember from last time, our luteal phase is more of those admin tasks. It's like getting things done. I think of it more of a Sunday, like a Sunday reset, versus Monday, you're setting goals for the week. You're getting yourself set up to have a successful week. So, yeah. And okay, then lastly, we're going to go into the superpowers and the dangers of being on your period. So superpowers, this is a time to set boundaries and to ask for help. It's a time where maybe you can give yourself that grace that, like, okay, things are a little bit harder, things feel a little bit different. So maybe this is the time to set your boundaries, to when it feels like you can be more emotional or sensitive, this can be a good time for you to really think on what makes you emotional or sensitive and to set those boundaries for the next month and for the rest of your life. And to ask for help. Like if you are feeling down and you have cramps, this is a time to maybe ask someone to bring you something, or if someone's going to the store, ask them to pick up something for you. It's a time where it's okay. Well, it's always okay to ask for help, but this is a time where it especially feels good to be cared for. So use this time to do that. And it's a good time to nourish, to take care of yourself, whatever that looks like for you. This is why I like this book, because it's not so much like some of the podcasts I listen to. It's like nourish yourself by not eating sugar, not drinking caffeine, not drinking alcohol, like taking out all these things. And this one is like, make sure you're eating enough protein and healthy fats and vitamins and minerals and everything. But also, like, if you want some ice cream, eat your ice cream. So nourish yourself in whatever way feels good to you. If you struggle with food in your body, for me, this is a good time where I really don't feel food guilt, where sometimes I do in other parts of my cycle. This time I'm like, whatever sounds good to me, I am eating, because this is when I'm going to take care of myself. And take note of what makes you feel good and what doesn't, because sometimes, yeah, the unhealthy things are not what makes me feel good. And so that's not really nourishing myself. But like the other day I had a huge cookie. It was giant. And I was like, oh, I'll just eat like half of it after lunch, whatever. I sat there and I ate the whole thing. And you know what? Me craving chocolate and craving sugar and being on the first day of my period and wanting something a little comforting, it was way less harmful for me to just eat the cookie than to crave it and eat half and shame myself for eating that and think about it for days. Like, that energy is just not what I have anymore. And it's not something that I feel in my menstrual phase, where sometimes on other phases I do feel a little bit of food guilt and I feel like, oh my gosh, I shouldn't be eating all this processed sugar or all this blah 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 blah. I feel this like food guilt, and I would love to just get rid of it all the time. But for me in my menstrual phase, it definitely feels easier to do that because I feel like I'm nourishing my body. And it's a time for rest, release, and receive, the 3 R's. So resting, build yourself more energy for spring and summer. If you feel like you're really down in your ovulation phase or your follicular phase, which are basically between your period and your luteal phase, maybe it's because you didn't rest enough during this menstrual phase. So it's a time to really recharge and allow yourself to rest before the rest of your phase. And then release, like I said before, it's a physical release and it's a mental release. Let go of what doesn't serve you. And then receive. This is the time to feel more insightful, to listen to your body, tune in, meditate. I've been doing a little bit more yoga and Pilates, and that has felt so good to just sit and be quiet and like let my thoughts flow through my brain. It is so nice. And I think it's especially because I'm in this time of my month where I just want to turn inward and listen to myself. And it's so empowering to like have a quiet moment and just let your thoughts flow rather than thinking about what's next and like having this structured pattern in your mind. It's more of just like, what's coming to my head? Why am I thinking about this? What do I think about this? What's this innate thought in my head? So it's really nice to tune back in and to receive these insights from yourself. And then some of the dangers is being unaware. If you ignore your symptoms or if you use painkillers, that can hide underlying causes. Don't get me wrong, I have prescribed period medication. Like I will take it when my cramps are really bad. And same thing with Advil, ibuprofen. If you need to be doing something and your cramps are inhibiting you from doing that, it's okay. Like, give yourself grace for taking painkillers. But at the same time, for me, I like to try to avoid it if I can, to kind of see, okay, are my cramps worse than last month? Are they better than last month? What do I think might be causing it? Just thinking about those underlying causes. It's important. And so if you can, and if it's not debilitating, I think I said a different word before. Inhibiting. Is inhibiting and debilitating similar? I think so. Whatever. If they're stopping you from doing your day-to-day activities, or if you're just feeling too much pain, totally give yourself grace. But if you feel like, okay, this is manageable and I want to see where I'm at, the sirens today are crazy. Okay, hopefully you just can't hear it in the microphone. But yeah, just remember to listen to your body. And if you ignore the time to retreat and rest, it can leave you feeling depleted for your cycle. And then another danger is like guilt or FOMO, either guilt of not being as productive or being more tired or restful or asking for help or setting boundaries. Let's all release that guilt. Like, unless, yeah, no, let's release the guilt. Guilt is saved for moral dilemmas. And if asking for help is not a bad thing and setting boundaries is not a bad thing, they're good things, they're positive things. So we don't need to be feeling guilt about them, which is easier said than done. But yeah. And then FOMO, just like if you're feeling like you want to say no to plans, but you have that little voice inside you that's like, come on, you just need to do it. Like having FOMO can be kind of a danger because maybe it'll make you do things that wouldn't actually serve you. So just be aware of that. And if you're sensitive to PMSing in your luteal phase, this is something I'm so guilty of. I really don't like the way that I feel during my luteal phase. And so when I get my period, I'm like, I'm back. I'm like back to being energized. I feel better. I'm like rushing into all these other things. And I think that can also deplete you. So that's something that I need to think about. I'm giving myself advice, just like I'm giving you all some knowledge. And yeah, so those are the dangers. Last couple points that the book makes is that this is a good time to really think on your big decisions. Also, if you get headaches or migraines before your period, that can be caused by your hormones level dropping, but also if you have a hormone imbalance, that can make those worse. So just something if you're struggling with that. And it can also be made worse by magnesium deficiency. So if you struggle with migraines or headaches before your period, maybe look into those things. And then also, it's the release of prostaglandins that can, at the start of your period, that can trigger inflammation and pain. So that's often why you get cramps, pain. That's probably why you can get acne, because inflammation causes acne, all those fun things. So yeah, that's all my research. So let's get into the last couple points here. I just want to talk about 2 more points. The first one is advocating for your cycle health. This can be a really difficult thing to do in the doctor's office. I know I want to do a whole episode just on birth control and on like my journey with birth control, and also just like the options that are out there and like how it's kind of hard to speak to doctors about it and all of those things. But sometimes in my experience, it seems like doctors don't care about menstrual pain or menstrual cycle issues or irregularities. It's kind of something that is just like, oh yeah, some people can get that. Like especially after I've gotten my IUD, every symptom that I bring up, they're like, oh, that could be caused by the IUD. And I'm like, okay, but also like I feel like I have something underlying, like what if something's wrong? So that's where I've started cycle tracking, because I'm trying to get some data on myself so that I can bring in specific issues to hopefully a doctor, and hopefully that will help. But I just want to hold space for the fact that doctors sometimes are really busy, and I know that they have so much going on, but when you're the patient and when you're having menstrual issues, I think that there is just this attitude of like, you're fine, and yeah, this could just happen, and like we don't know too much about it in that way. And that can be really hard, and it can be really defeating, and it can make you feel like something's just wrong with you, or that you're like, it can kind of gaslight you into thinking that nothing's wrong when maybe something is. Like all those things, just remember that you know your body the best. So it's so important to keep advocating for yourself, especially if you think that something's wrong. And a good way to do that, and also like, I know that there's the like naturopathic doctors and people who really specialize in hormone health, but it's so expensive. Like I can't afford that, and it's something to keep up, and that's something that a lot of people really can't afford to do. And so it's hard. It's really hard to try to get help with your period. And I like listening to podcasts. I like trying to educate myself, but at the same time, it's just something that I need to work on, is just advocating for my own health. And I actually set up an appointment in a couple weeks with my doctor, or in a couple months with my doctor. So once I have all this information on my cycle, I'm going to bring my specific concerns. I'm not going to go over them now because I don't want to make other people nervous if they have the symptoms. I would talk about it if I had more information, but I don't. So it's something that I need to do, is just advocate for my cycle health more. And the way that I'm doing that is taking ownership by tracking my cycle every day. I take my body temperature. I talk about my symptoms. I talk about my flow, what's going on, my body image, everything. Just tracking. And if anyone's interested in my cycle tracking like form, I'll post it on the Instagram so that if you want to cycle track with me, you totally can. So check it out on Sustainable Soul Pod on Instagram. And yeah, so I just wanted to mention it's important to advocate for your cycle health, especially if you think something's wrong. Don't let people tell you how your body works. Like, doctors know so much, and I am not taking away from that in the slightest. My dad is a doctor in this field, and I know he knows so much. I know his colleagues know so much, but at the same time, they don't know your body. Like, you know your body, and they don't know your boundaries. They don't know what you're comfortable with and what you're not comfortable with. And while pain and like lots of discomfort is very common, it's really not normal. It's because there's some sort of imbalance. So if it's affecting your life, I think it's worth it to put time and energy into tracking and going to specialists and going to doctors and advocating for yourself to make your quality of life better, because your period should be something to work with, not against. Because like I talked about before, there's all these superpowers of being on your period that can just get masked by the pain and discomfort and bad stigma around it. And then the last thing I want to talk about is just reclaiming the idea of like, when people say like, oh, she's just on her period, like, you know, the kind of man verbiage of like, oh, are you just on your period or something? Like, that whole thing, it boils my blood. Do not get me wrong. I think that women should never be put down for being on their periods. They should never be made to be less productive, less than, non-functional, and that's something that has been in the media and in societies and cultures forever, and that is not something to take lightly, and I do not take it lightly. But what I have done is kind of reclaiming that for myself is like, it's kind of a release to remember that we don't have to completely combat that, like go to the opposite side of the spectrum, because yeah, sometimes I don't feel as productive on my period because there are all these hormonal changes, and maybe if I don't feel productive in this one very masculine work-centric way, that doesn't mean that I'm not productive. I'm productive in other ways. I'm feeling more intuitive, I'm turning more inwards, I'm doing the self-work. Like, yeah, maybe I don't feel as productive at work because I don't care about that stuff as much when I'm on my period, because I care more about myself and self-love and nourishing myself, and that is just as valid. So it's just important for me to remember that you don't have to be the complete opposite. Like, you don't have to be some like girl boss superwoman. I'm putting this in quotes if you're not watching on YouTube. Like, you don't have to push through this pain and discomfort and like different feelings than the capitalism workforce 9-to-5 society that we have. Like, if you're not feeling like you are particularly wanting to like go to work and do admin tasks and go to meetings, that is totally okay. And it doesn't mean that you're not a productive human being. It doesn't mean that you're less than. It doesn't mean that you should be dismissed. And if you're feeling energized, like, do whatever makes you feel good. If that makes you feel good, keep doing it. But it's also good to give ourselves grace and remember that we have different superpowers during this time. We have different productivity levels. We have different ways of showing up for ourselves. And so sometimes when I am super emotional and I do something like, kind of like I say something that wouldn't be like me, sometimes I do say, oh, it's because I was on my period, which is sometimes true for me. My hormones affect me differently than they're going to affect other people, and I don't see that when I'm talking about myself. If someone else says it about me, bye. You can't be making judgments about me and my health. But for myself, like, it is a good way for me to remember that things are happening in my body, and it's okay if I act a little bit normally than I might in other parts of my cycle. So I think it's important to just reclaim the idea that you don't have to conform to what society thinks of a woman on her period as, but you also don't have to completely rebel against it. I think it's important to just work with how you are feeling. Remember that you know yourself the best. Don't just rot. Like, I don't think we need to like take what's on the media and be like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna be bloated and cramping and needing chocolate and sweet treats and stuff, and then just taking that and doing it, because that might not make you feel good. Like, sometimes nourishing yourself doesn't mean that. Sometimes it does. Sometimes you need rest. I love to sit in my bed right there and eat a sweet treat and watch movies, and that is such a great way to nourish yourself. But if that doesn't feel good for you, if you'd rather go on a walk or do some yoga or eat a huge bowl of vegetables, whatever makes you feel good is what you should be doing. So never let anyone tell you how to live your life, how to be on your period. This is all a time for you to look inward and to give yourself love and grace and a big hug. Let's all give ourselves a big hug right now. I'm doing it if you're not watching on YouTube. And it just feels good to remember that we are so strong and we are so smart about ourselves. And this is a time to tap into that. All right, let's set an intention and something to let go of for this period. Like we said, this is the beginning of our cycle. Day 1 of your cycle is the day you start fully bleeding, and it's a new chapter. It's a new month. It's a new chapter. It's a new everything. Happy June, right? Going back to the beginning. And okay, so I've set my intention and what I'm letting go of, but I also am inviting you to set your intention and what you're letting go of as well. And yeah, so I'll let you know mine, and I challenge you to think of it as well. So my intention for this month is to work on feeling as energized as possible every single day. So I talked about this in my last wellness coaching session, but something that I've kind of tried to reframe health and being like, okay, I just want to be as healthy as possible. But that can be hard because health is tied up in a lot of diet culture things. Like being healthy is sometimes seen as being smaller or seen as cutting things out of your diet. But instead, we talked about how maybe I should be flipping that to, instead of feeling as healthy as possible, feeling as energized as possible. So that's getting more sleep, drinking more water, eating foods that make me feel energized. All of these things, that is my intention for the month, is just to tap into feeling as energized as possible every single day. And then what I'm letting go of is being too hard on myself and blaming myself for things. I think the self-guilt and the guilty conscience that I have is really impacting the way that I show up for myself and others, and that's something that I'm really trying to let go of by giving myself grace, not being too hard on myself, taking deep breaths when I feel the little critic coming out of my brain. So that's what I'm attempting to let go of this month. And yeah, that was my episode all about periods, all about our menstrual cycle. I hope that you enjoyed. I hope that you, A, take care of yourself during this time, and B, remember that you know yourself the best. And don't let anyone else tell you differently. All right, you are strong, you are smart, you are perfect, you are beautiful, you are amazing, and I love you so much, and I will talk to you next week. Bye.